Everything's been really awesome. Great job to the first session presenters. And now we're going to turn it over to our next group. So I will pass the mic over to Hailey and I'll get our technology going for this first session.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our panel. I'd like to start by thanking our MEM faculty for organizing this week and bringing our cohorts together. Our topic for today is recreation or recreation, managing for the future. My name is Hailey Clark, and I am working with the International Mountain Bike Association.
I'm Isabel English, and I'm working with the Forest Service.
I'm Catherine Escamillia, and I'm working with the National Park Service.
I'm Peter Engh, and I'm working with the town of Buena Vista.
So most of us, if not all of us here, love spending time outdoors. But can we love the outdoors to death? The outdoor recreation industry provides millions of jobs in the US and billions of dollars of state and federal revenues. The tourism industry has especially surged over the last decade. This is partly due to the digital age and the growth of social media, but it was especially exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Many recreation areas were not prepared for this surge of tourism. It created conflicts between user groups and between tourists and local communities. Many of the impacts from tourism include trampling vegetation, social trailing, sacrificial zones, pollution, human waste, pet waste, and many more. It adversely affects the environment, local communities, and the visitor experience. That's why we're trying to explore ways to manage recreation for the future.
So we're working with a wide spectrum of organizations from the international level down to the federal level and to the local and municipal level. And we're dealing with all the impacts that outdoor recreation has on our environment. As Isabel said, due to the recent boom in usership from the pandemic, now is a perfect time to expand accessibility and inclusivity, but that needs to be done in a sustainable way to maximize user experience and minimize user impacts.
We can make our shared outdoor spaces more resilient to this increase in outdoor recreation by investing in our resources now. By investing time and effort, being open to collaboration, and leveraging partnerships, the organizations that we're all working with can increase their internal capacity and develop more strategic management strategies. Managing for multiple uses poses many challenges, but bringing together land managers, recreationists, and the communities expands and increases the possibilities to improve recreation management. Properly managed outdoor recreation can be sustainable if we make an effort now to mitigate impacts, maintain landscapes and infrastructure, and educate communities. The members of this panel are exploring how we can all love and enjoy the outdoors without loving them to death. So now Hailey will talk about her project that's being implemented on a national scale.
Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, as I mentioned, my community sponsor is the International Mountain Bike Association, also called IMBA. They are a nonprofit organization that aims to create, enhance, and protect great places to ride mountain bikes. Since 1988, IMBA has taught and encouraged low-impact riding, grassroots advocacy, sustainable trail design, innovative land management practices, and cooperation among trail user groups. While I've been heavily immersed in many aspects of this organization, the majority of my time in my master's project will focus on a coalition called Trails Are Common Ground, which was initiated by IMBA in response to the influx of trail users during the COVID pandemic. This coalition aims to unify all user groups to promote respect on the trails. As of right now, we have 52 partner organizations from land manager agencies to supportive brands and individual trail users. Next slide, please. My role in the coalition is very diverse, and my deliverables will likely change over the next 9 months since it's such a young movement. So far, I have helped develop a trail education quiz, which is something we may pursue further in the future as an educational resource. I am also a participant on the steering committee and DEI task force, which helped to navigate our next steps. I am currently assisting on a trail modernization white paper, which will serve as an educational resource for land managers. It is focused mostly on progressive trail design that promotes pockets of separate use for different users, something that will become increasingly necessary over the next few years. Informing this paper has also involved an in-depth research on a rising user group, electric mountain bikers, and understanding adaptive users and their needs and desires to ensure accessibility and inclusion for everyone. This resource will be mostly implemented on more populated trails. We likely won't see these management practices so much here in Gunnison, but on the Front Range, it will be very imperative to reducing conflict and maintaining user experience. For example, one trail system uses a technique that involves permitting hikers on even days on certain trails and bikers on odd days. This is just one technique that we're going to highlight in our paper. Also, to further inform this project, we are considering implementing a pilot study in the Gunnison Valley to assess perceptions of e-mountain bikes and to further inform this slightly controversial topic. Next slide, please. So ultimately, we want people to see this imagery and associate it with our guiding principles to ensure a safe and welcoming environment for anybody and everybody. So if you're going along and you see this in a storefront or someone has the sticker on their bike, it's kind of promoting and representing our principles just to create a more welcoming atmosphere on the trails. Working on such a young coalition has offered tremendous room for creativity, and it has been great to experience the trial and error aspects of it. But overall, mountain biking and trails are very important aspects of my life, so I'm very excited to be able to unify my passions with a work that will help to protect these trails and open opportunities for others in the future. Now, Isabel will introduce her project working with the National Forest Service.
My name is Isabel, and my project is titled Driving Conservation Outcomes Through Innovative Finance of Recreation Management. I started working on this project in October, and it is a legacy MEM project. So I'm the fourth student to do a project related to this issue. I've been working on a team with 3 outdoor industry MBA students and another fellow first year MEMer, shouts out Annie. We are working under a Forest Service grant called Innovative Finance for National Forests that is facilitated by the National Forest Foundation. Next slide, please. Our project takes place in the Gunnison National Forest surrounding Crested Butte, Colorado, and what many people refer to as the 6 kingdoms of Crested Butte, which includes Kebler, Slate River, Washington Gulch, Gothic, Brush Creek, and Cement Creek drainages. Historically, these areas had a dispersed free-for-all camping system. You could go set up a tent and camp wherever. But since 2013, visitation to the Gunnison Valley has doubled, and this has led to a lot of resource degradation in these drainages. Issues reported include trampling vegetation, improper fire rings, pollution, human waste, disruptions to wildlife, and many more. Last year, we transitioned from a dispersed camping system to a designated system. So now every site has its own signage and firing in place. But now we're looking at ways to manage this. Next slide, please. So what we're looking at doing is developing a learning laboratory concept. This would be a partnership between Western and the forest where students can gain hands-on recreation management experience. This benefits them in gaining experience, but as well as helps bridging the gap between graduating students and incoming careers into Forest Service jobs. We're also looking to partner with many local entities that are already very active cleaning up campsites and these drainages already. This includes the Gunnison County Sustainable Tourism and Outdoor Recreation Committee and the Crested Butte Mountain Bike Association. So we're working with them to develop a partnership program. And last and most importantly, we are looking to secure financial support. There is a huge backlog in maintenance and funding in the Forest Service already, so we're trying to supplement that elsewhere. Originally, we were focusing on user-based fees like overnight fees or dispersed camping passes. However, we have kind of shifted gears in recent times due to changing conditions in the Forest Service. And we are now exploring a private payer model to help us get investment into the program to get it started. So we've been talking to different philanthropists and people who fund conservation projects in Crested Butte. And we're also now exploring a adopt a campsite idea where businesses in Crested Butte and Gunnison can fund the program in exchange for sponsorship, signage, and volunteer day work in these drainages. Next slide, please. Overall, the outcomes that we're desiring to have are generating sustainable revenue to support the maintenance and implementation of infrastructure in these drainages. We're also trying to generate revenue for conservation projects for students to conduct, as well as outreach and leave no trace ethics. We're also trying to provide them with a hands-on recreation management experience. And lastly, providing tourists with a sustainable recreation opportunity. There's lots of room for first years to get involved in this project in the future. And I'm going to hand it off to Catherine, who's talking about her work with Channel Islands National Park.
Woo!
Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine, and the project that I'm working on involves monitoring visitor impacts to cultural resources in Channel Islands National Park. That's a mouthful with a lot of buzzwords, as Garrett pointed out. So I'll start to unpack that by talking about the importance of cultural resources in this park. So the Chumash Native Americans have a super long history of inhabitants on these islands. Their villages operated under complex social hierarchies, and they used tools to mint money and make fish hooks, spears, arrowheads, and all sorts of other things that they needed to sustain and maintain life on the islands for thousands of years. Even though the Chumash were removed from the islands over 200 years ago, they still have not only artifacts, but ancestors buried here, and their deep connection to the land and waters remains very much intact. Monitoring these artifacts and archaeological sites is just one way that this park can contribute to community healing after the injustice of displacement. The only problem here is that this park doesn't currently have any monitoring protocols, so that's where I come into this. I figured you guys might be wondering where exactly these islands are, so here's a map for reference. The Channel Islands lie off the coast of Southern California, in between Los Angeles and Santa Barbara, and the bulk of my fieldwork will be focused on Santa Rosa Island. Visitor activities here, like social trails, cause immense impacts to the land and resources. So I'll be monitoring for the social trailing, as well as number and location of backcountry campgrounds and sites, and trash throughout the backcountry. And then the methods that I use on Santa Rosa will hopefully be implemented to other islands in the park. The specific archaeological sites that I'll be monitoring will be decided upon through consultation with our Chumash tribal partners. And I'll also be interviewing our NPS island-based rangers, concessionaire boating staff, and volunteer naturalists to try to gain an understanding of the knowledge that's being relayed to the visitors about Chumash history and leave no trace principles. What I developed for the park will be guidelines for desired conditions of these archaeological sites, along with indicators, triggers, and possible thresholds. I'll also have an outline of the field methods that should be repeated in their frequency. And I'll also be developing a quick access PDF for our staff as well as our partner staff, just to kind of create a more uniform knowledge of the resources on the park. Thank you.
Click again. All right, so my name is Peter and I'm working with the town of Buena Vista. on their Whitewater Park and Whipple Trail system. The town of Buena Vista is one valley over to the east in Chaffee County, and it's home to the Arkansas River, which is one of the most popular whitewater rafting rivers in the world. The river park, which is pictured right here, used to be a popular trash dump for the town, but due to renovation efforts, it's now home to the Whitewater Park and the Whipple Trail system, which connects the town of Buena Vista to local wilderness areas. Next slide. So the river park is in need of an upgrade. The trail system has a lot of erosion issues, and the trails need to be widened, as well as the signage on the trails needs to be expanded. In the Whitewater Park, several features have reached their max hydrological performance, and they're well below it now. So that means that the waves that they offer are either too steep or too shallow for surfers or kayakers. So my project is to create a document that details the vision, maintenance and improvement projects along the river park in Buena Vista. And this will showcase a master plan to kind of detail where funds are going to in the park, and also make the area more attractive to grants because they can show a unified vision for the park. My secondary objective is there is a stretch of river above the Whipple Trail Bridge that's sort of flat. And if you've ever been to the Arkansas River, it's this beautiful rocky canyony river. So we're hoping to do a potential river habitat project there to encourage fish habitat, and hopefully that would spread angler pressure upstream of some of those whitewater features. And then my tertiary objectives would be to personally volunteer on some of the renovation efforts and inform the public on what's happening at the river park. Next slide, please. So these are some of my stakeholders. I'm working closely with the town of Buena Vista and the BV Single Track Coalition on trails in the Whitewater Park. We're also hoping to contact some local fly shops and local anglers and reach out to Trout Unlimited for the river restoration project. And lastly, these projects really benefit local users and visiting users. And the river park is a huge boon to the town of Buena Vista, as daily usership in the summer can reach 500 plus a day. So yeah, I was talking with Garrett yesterday about how it's important to shape the community around the locals instead of around the visitors, and this is hopefully an effort to do that. So thank you. Any questions? Oh, also, the town of Buena Vista is always looking for first years and MEM students. So, Peyton?
I have a question for Isabel. I was wondering, with your camping, if you're going to do anything to make sure locals have any sort of protected use to those areas, especially seeing as like Washington Gulch is used by a lot of seasonal employees that can't afford housing in the valley.
That is a very difficult aspect of this project when you have a ton of people living in the forest. And I think that's part of the reason we strayed away from reservation systems and user-based fees altogether. With the current climate in CB, there's just not enough housing. Ideally, in the future, we'd like to make campgrounds specifically for local workers, but that is definitely a faraway vision.
I have a question for Hailey. I am curious if your organization or you have any kind of plan to kind of calm down the animosity in the mountain biking community between e-bikes and what I've heard as referred to as acoustic bikes.
Great question. Sean wants to know how we're going to navigate the relationship between e-bikes and what we call acoustic bikes. Yeah, because like I said, it's very controversial, and it's kind of a sore spot in IMBA right now, just because it's just rapidly growing technology is changing faster than land managers can keep up with. So right now we created a working group to kind of mostly address like out of class e-bikes are kind of becoming the pressing issue. But it involves representatives from all industries, the moto industry, the mountain bike industry, e-bike industry, to kind of implement educational resources that will be given out at the retailer front when you buy an e-bike. So just kind of more education, I think, on trail etiquette and just really talking about where they can be ridden and where they cannot, and making sure that it's done safely and correct. Jojo?
A question for Catherine. I'm interested in some of the metrics and the monitoring that you're doing. Are there locations like tribal cultural properties or locations that have seasonal closings that you're working with, or is it just monitoring from impacts?
Thank you, Jojo. Her question was, are there any specific locations that have seasonal closures from previous monitoring, or
just like future, like in consultation, are you seeing like tribal cultural properties that have like reasons to close them seasonally?
So the monitoring that I do will actually decide whether or not we will do seasonal closures, especially in these historic village sites that are in close proximity to the pier, which is where all of the visitors get off the boat. So it takes about 2.5 hours to get out to the island. And when they get off, they have about 2 hours on the island, so they can only go so far. So the areas that are closer to the pier just like get more visitation and are seeing more impacts. So the monitoring that I do will kind of see how bad that is, like to what extent they're being impacted, and then the management can make the decision to do seasonal closures from there. Matthew?
My question is also for you, Catherine. You mentioned thresholds. Could you explain a little bit of what that means?
Yeah, thank you. So for each archaeological site, I'm going to outline the desired conditions, which will also be kind of talked about with our CHUMASH tribal partners. And from there, you get to an indicator first, and that's kind of like an activity where it raises alarms with our management. So I guess if there were like 2 new backcountry campgrounds that popped up, or let's just say 1 new backcountry campground popped up in close proximity to an archaeological site. So that is kind of an indicator. And then you get to a trigger, which would be another campsite pops up close to a super sensitive site. And then the threshold would be like the stop sign to stop any more campgrounds from popping up. And that's where we would possibly implement the seasonal closure.
There's still time for more questions.
Landon?
We're gonna pick on Catherine a little more. Great job, my friend. I'm super excited for this project. I wanted to ask, just some of my experience with like cultural resource management has shown that like a lot of visitors don't understand what a cultural resource looks like, whether that's an archaeological site, an artifact, or just a culturally significant area. Is there any guidance that either you will be developing through this project or someone else might want to pick up that would be kind of an identification guide for visitors to kind of educate them about what cultural resources are?
Thank you. So there are interpretive signs out on the islands, but there's not really anything that like blatantly shows this is what you might encounter on the islands. A big reason for that is because it's an island park and we get a lot of like wind and erosion, and the things that they might encounter are possibly grave sites that are being eroded away and just being unearthed. So that's why we're relying pretty heavily on like word of mouth, and we want our NPS staff and the naturalists and the concessionaire staff to just like kind of help just spread the word that cultural resources are present on the islands. And if you do encounter them, just be respectful, and you know, you can observe it, but don't like take anything or take photos, because even that can be disrespectful.
All right, I've got somebody who's had their hand up for a bit.
Sorry. Peter, I just have a quick question. I was wondering how you balance living in Gunnison and working on a project in a town an hour and change away, and if that's presented any challenges for you.
Yeah, Emma asked about the challenges presented by working an hour and a half away from my project. Luckily, I have a work schedule that frees up my Friday afternoons. So we've mostly been doing, Zoom meetings, but every now and then I'll drive over Cottonwood Pass from Crested Butte and get to spend the afternoon there. So I'm lucky in that way.
All right, and a last question from Phil.
Yeah, my question was also for Pete. It's kind of a two-part question, just out of curiosity. How long has it been since that site was used as a dumping ground? And when did that kind of renovation go? And then my second part was, are there other stakeholders that you're working with besides just the town of Buena Vista, other public land managers or nonprofits that are interested in the same goals of Buena Vista?
Yeah, so I believe it was a trash dump maybe in the early 1900s, and then the more recent restoration efforts started when they built a soccer field in the river part. And then that kind of was the catalyst to create a trail system and a whitewater park like Salida. I think Salida kind of led the way, and Buena Vista saw that as a viable option for them too. So, and then as far as other stakeholders, the Whipple Trail is kind of balanced between town property and the BLM. So a lot of the trail restoration has to go through the BLM as well.
Right, well, let's give a round of applause.